Picture this. You're detained without being told why. You're separated from your family. You don't have access to a lawyer. You're held in conditions that violate basic standards of human dignity. You might think I'm describing an authoritarian regime halfway around the world, but I'm describing what's happening right now, right here in America, to thousands of people who are within our borders, people who, under our Constitution, have rights. Welcome back to Ethos Trek. As a whole, this podcast seeks to examine current events through an ethical lens. We use U.S. and international law, and when possible, the standards and norms that have been a part of this democracy since its infancy. In this series, which we're calling Rights Under Siege, we'll be doing the same thing. We'll be examining human rights violations through the lens of U.S. and international law. I'm Sera, and over this series, we'll be asking some fundamental questions. What are our rights? Who's supposed to protect them? And what happens when those protections fail? Today, the first in the series, immigration enforcement and the erosion of due process. Before we dive into specific policies and their impacts, we need to establish the legal foundation. What rights do people have when they're on U.S. soil? And what obligations does our government have toward them? Let's start with something fundamental, the oath of office. Every president, every member of Congress, every federal judge, and every military officer takes an oath, not to a party, not to a person, but to the Constitution of the United States. Here's what the presidential oath says, quote, I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Preserve, protect, and defend. Not just for some people, for everyone under our jurisdiction. Now, here's something that might surprise you. The Constitution doesn't say citizens in most of its protections. The Fourth Amendment doesn't say the right of the citizens to be secure in their persons. It says the right of the people to be secure. The Fifth Amendment doesn't guarantee no citizen shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. It says no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. This isn't an accident. The framers knew the difference between citizen and person, and the Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed this principle. In the 2001 case Zedvitas v. Davis, the court held that even non-citizens have due process rights. In 1982's Plyler v. Doe, the court ruled that the states cannot deny education to undocumented children because they are persons under the 14th Amendment. The principle is clear. If you are physically present in the United States, you have constitutional protections, period. Now, let's look at international law. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations in 1948, establishes fundamental rights that apply to all human beings. Let me read you Article 1. Quote, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Close quote. Not all citizens, all human beings. Article 2 says everyone is entitled to these rights, quote, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Other relevant articles include Article 3, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Article 5, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. Article 7, all are equal before the law. Article 9, no one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. The UDHR isn't binding law in the United States. And technically, you're correct. But here's what matters. These principles have influenced binding treaties that the U.S. has ratified. like the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And they represent a global consensus about basic human dignity. The question we have to ask is this: are we living up to these standards? Or have we created a two-tiered system where some people get due process and others don't? Let me walk you through what immigration looks like in America today. And you tell me if this sounds like due process. Family separation. Families are being separated at the border and in communities across the country. Parents are deported while their children, often U.S. citizens, remain here. Children are detained separately from their parents, sometimes for months. In 2018, Trump's first term, we saw systematic family separation as official policy. Thousands of children were taken from their parents. Some were infants. The government didn't keep adequate records, if at all, which means some families may never be reunited. Think about that. The government of the United States took children from their parents and didn't keep track of how to give them back. The American Academy of Pediatrics called this policy government-sanctioned child abuse. Why? Because the trauma of separation causes documented long-term psychological harm to children. Is this consistent with Article 5 of the Universal Declaration? Freedom from cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment? Let's talk about what detention looks like. We have reports from government inspectors, lawyers, and journalists who have visited these facilities. They noted overcrowding so severe that people sleep on concrete floors, inadequate food and water. In fact, we heard in Alligator Alcatraz that they were deliberately giving them food that had spoiled and water that was not clean. Lack of basic hygiene supplies, soap, toothbrushes, clean clothes. Let's not even talk about the toileting facilities. Insufficient medical care. Children held in cage-like structures. Use of solitary confinement. The Department of Homeland Security's own Inspector General found dangerous overcrowding and prolonged detention in violation of the government's own standards. These aren't administrative violations. These are conditions that the international human rights law would classify as inhumane. Let's talk about due process violations. Here's how due process is supposed to work. If the government wants to take away your liberty, whether through criminal prosecution or deportation, you get notice of the charges, access to a lawyer, the right to present evidence, and a fair hearing before a neutral judge. But this is the reality right now in immigration. There is no right to a government-appointed lawyer, even for children. Hearings happen via video conference from detention centers. Interpreters may be inadequate if they're available at all. People are given complex legal documents in languages they don't read. Judges face pressure to rush through cases. The immigration courts are part of the Department of Justice, the same department that's prosecuting the cases. That's not an independent judiciary. In the fiscal year 2020, the average immigration case took over 1,000 days to resolve. That's nearly 3 years. Imagine being held in detention, separated from your family, for 3 years while waiting for a hearing. They're also engaging in racial profiling. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, but immigration enforcement often involves stops based on how someone looks or speaks. If you're Latino in certain parts of the country, you're more likely to be stopped and asked for papers. That's not law enforcement. That's racial profiling, and it violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. There are U.S. citizens, people born in this country, who carry their birth certificates because they're afraid of being detained based on their appearance. This causes fear. The community raids cause fear. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, conducts raids in communities, workplaces, and homes, sometimes with warrants, sometimes without. They arrest not just the targeted individual, but often anyone else who's present and can't immediately prove status. The Fourth Amendment requires warrants based on probable cause, but ICE frequently uses civil immigration warrants, which have a lower standard and can be issued by ICE itself, not a judge. This creates a climate of fear. People are afraid to send their kids to school, go to the hospital, report crimes, testify as witnesses, access services they're legally entitled to. When people are afraid to access health care, we all suffer. When people don't report crimes, entire communities become less safe. None of this is new. Let's look at American history. In 1942, the U.S. government forcibly relocated over 120,000 Japanese Americans. Yeah, Japanese Americans. Most of them were U.S. citizens to internment camps. They lost their homes, their businesses, their freedom. The reason? Fear and racial prejudice during World War II. In 1988, President Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act, formally apologizing and providing reparations. The act stated that the internment was based on, quote, race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership, unquote. In other words, we were wrong, badly wrong. Or consider Operation Wetback. Yes, that is the name. In 1954, when the U.S. deported over 1 million people of Mexican descent, including U.S. citizens, in massive raids. The name itself reveals the racial animus behind the policy. Or the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which banned Chinese immigration and denied citizenship to Chinese people who were already here. We didn't repeal that until 1943. Each time we've looked back and said, that was wrong. That violated our values. That wasn't who we want to be. That's not how we want to be seen. So, here's my question. When we look back at this era, what will we say about how we treated immigrants and asylum seekers? Will we be proud of these policies? Or will we be apologizing and offering reparations? History suggests we need to be very, very careful about policies that target specific groups, deny due process, and treat human beings as less than human. So if these policies violate constitutional and human rights, who has the legal or ethical obligation to stop them? Well, federal judges. Federal judges have lifetime appointments for exactly this reason, so they can rule according to law without fear of political retaliation. And many have. Judges have blocked family separation policies, ruled detention conditions unconstitutional, and enforced due process rights. But judicial action is slow, and people suffer while the cases wind their way through the system. Members of Congress have an obligation. In fact, Congress has multiple tools. Oversight hearings, they can bring officials in to testify under oath about policies and conditions. They have the power of the purse. Funding for enforcement comes from Congress. Legislation. Congress can pass laws that protect rights and limit enforcement powers. They also have impeachment for officials who violate their oath of office. But here's the problem. Oversight requires will. It requires members of Congress to put constitutional duty above party loyalty. Every member of Congress took an oath to, quote, support and defend the Constitution, unquote. Not to support their party, not to protect the president, to defend the Constitution. Who else? Well, when we had them, inspectors general. Each federal agency has or had an inspector general, an independent watchdog who investigates waste, fraud, and abuse. The DHS Inspector General had documented problems, but IGs can only investigate and report. They can't force change. Career civil servants. There are thousands of career employees in immigration agencies who didn't sign up for policies that separate families or deny due process. Some have spoken out, some have resigned, some have been furloughed, some are whistleblowers. The Whistleblower Protection Act is supposed to protect federal employees who report violations of the law. Unfortunately, whistleblowers in this administration often face retaliation despite these protections. State and local officials. Here's something important. States and localities are not required to enforce federal immigration law. In the 1997 case, Prince versus the United States, the Supreme Court ruled that the federal government cannot force state and local officials to carry out federal programs. This is why the so-called sanctuary cities are legal. Local police can decline to hold people for ICE. They can decline to ask about immigration status. They're not obstructing the law. They're just not helping to enforce it. Some people object to this, but this is the same federalism principle that allows states to legalize marijuana despite federal law, or to refuse to enforce federal gun regulations. Immigration attorneys, legal advocates, they also are doing a lot. Organizations like ACLU, the Immigrant Defense Project, RACES, RAICES, and thousands of individual attorneys are fighting these cases. They're filing lawsuits, representing people in immigration court, documenting violations, but they're overwhelmed. There aren't nearly enough lawyers for the number of people who need representation. We all have an obligation. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. In a democracy, we're all responsible. If we stay silent while people's rights are violated, we're complicit. If we vote for politicians who support these policies without demanding accountability, we're complicit. The German Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller, who survived Nazi concentration camps, wrote this, quote, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." Unquote. If we allow a two-tiered system of justice, one for people we consider us, and another for people we consider them, we've already lost the Constitution we claim to defend. We've covered a lot today. Before we end, I want to leave you with some questions to think about and some concrete actions you can take. Questions for critical thinking. First, what other periods in American history have we seen mass detention or deportation of specific populations? And what did we later conclude about those actions? Think about Japanese internment. Think about Operation Wetback. Each time, we eventually acknowledged we were wrong. Are we making the same mistake now? Second, how does viewing certain groups as fundamentally other or less than make rights violations possible? When we use dehumanizing language, calling people illegals or aliens or invaders, we make it easier to treat them inhumanely. Language matters. Words matter. It shapes how we think and what we tolerate. Third, if the government can detain or deport people without full due process protections, what prevents those same shortcuts from eventually being used against citizens? Rights are not divisible. Either we have due process or we don't. Once we create exceptions, those exceptions expand. And fourth, if you or someone you love were accused of something, what rights would you want them to have? Should those rights apply to everyone or only some people? This is a test of principle. Do you believe in rights only when they benefit you? Or do you believe in rights as a foundation of human dignity? What can you do? Let's talk about immediate actions. Know your rights and others' rights. The ACLU has Know Your Rights information on their website. You can print out pocket cards I'll leave a link in the description box below. Share this information, especially in immigrant communities. If ICE comes to your door, you don't have to let them in without a judicial warrant. If you're stopped, you have the right to remain silent. Document and report. If you witness immigration enforcement actions that seem to violate due process, document safely. Note the time, location, what you observed. Pull out your phone and video if you can. Don't interfere with law enforcement, but observe and record from a safe distance. Report to organizations like the ACLU or local immigration legal services. Support legal defense funds. Organizations need money to provide representation. RACES, RAICES, the Legal Defense Project, and local immigration legal aid organizations are doing crucial work. Even small donations help. Stay engaged now and going forward. Contact your representatives. Be specific. Don't just say, I'm concerned about immigration. Say, I want you to hold oversight hearings on detention conditions at the facility in whatever location. Or, I want you to oppose funding for family separation. Or, I want you to support legislation ensuring legal representation in immigration court. Congressional offices track what constituents call about. Your call does matter, especially on local issues. I do recognize the current GOP reps are pretty much cowards. They run from town halls, call police on constituents asking questions. I even have a senator in my state who will send cease and desist emails following a single email asking him to vote one way. But I assure you, they are keeping track. They may fear you, but they fear losing their cushy seat more. Support local sanctuary policies. Many cities and counties have policies limiting cooperation with ICE. These protect entire communities and allow police to build trust. Show up at city council meetings. Speak during public comment. Let officials know you support these sanctuary policies. Counter the narrative. When you hear dehumanizing language about immigrants, speak up. Share facts. Share stories. Humanize the people we're talking about. For long-term commitment, get trained as a legal observer. Organizations like the National Lawyers Guild, and I'll leave a link below, train volunteers to observe and document enforcement actions. This is a concrete way to help protect people's rights. Build community networks. Rapid response networks alert communities when ICE is active in the area. These networks help people stay safe and connect them with legal resources. And finally, for some universal actions for every episode, stay informed. Talk to people. Take care of yourself. Before we go, I want to read something. It's a letter written by a detained immigrant. Quote, I came here seeking safety for my family. Instead, I found myself in a cage. I see my children only through glass. I don't know when or if I'll hold them again, but I want you to know I am a person. I have dignity. I have rights. Please don't forget us. We can't forget. We must not forget. The next time on Rights Under Siege, the First Amendment under fire, we'll examine threats to press freedom, free speech, and the separation of church and state. Until then, stay engaged, stay informed, and remember your power as a citizen.